When you hear that in India, there are 440 million people living below the poverty line, right down at the bottom of the pyramid, it's reasonable to feel shocked, saddened, and even painfully helpless. But consider this. If we somehow figured out a way to make everyone in the country capable of spending a little over $1 a day, will we have created a happy country? Further, if the poverty line is $1.25 a day today, it'll be $5 a day tomorrow. It'll be $10 a day the day after. In that sense, there's always going to be a poverty line, just as a pyramid will always have a bottom. So the whole exercise of poverty eradication in such terms seemed to me like wanting to do a world trip, but on a treadmill. By reacting and responding to the mere symptoms of poverty, whose definition, by the way, has been reduced down to dollar terms, we are simply feeding the very patterns that perpetuate the disease of poverty. I decided to travel across India in early 2008, and I set a condition for myself just to make it a little more interesting. The condition was that I shouldn't need to pay for my stay or for my food. And I soon realized that I could survive on that condition only if I traveled through rural India. And I thought I could probably last a couple of weeks or max a month, but rural India kept me alive on the road for 2.5 years. The scores of families that hosted me and fed me across the country, they were all below the poverty line. Having survived on their love and on their generosity, and having seen their stories of pain and glory and of the beauty that they're capable of, I feel it's absolutely absurd to treat them as mere dots on a plot incidentally below a certain poverty line. The journey also gave me a chance to spend about 10 months in the tribal belts that extend from Kutch in the far west all the way to Sundarbans in the east. I was amazed to see some of these communities living the answers to the kind of questions I hadn't even begun to ask. I was blown away and inspired by the depth of their happiness. I became curious to understand the recipe. I learned from them that there is something called essential knowledge. The knowledge of how to coexist in synergy with nature. This, according to them, is absolutely essential. It's a must-have kind of knowledge. All else is bonus. This essential knowledge is based on a very deep understanding of the natural environment of a particular region. So it is specific to that region. All the aspects of lifestyle, for example, architecture, food, clothing, they all invariably evolve around this knowledge. And so they also evolve to be unique to that region. And this uniqueness gives an identity to the inhabitants of that particular region and binds them into a strong community. This deep sense of community, rooted in the knowledge of how to coexist, is what enhances the immunity of inhabitants against odds and makes them resilient. A community in which lifestyles undergo drastic changes, the inhabitants gradually start losing connect with the knowledge. So the ways of the community come into direct conflict with the rhythms of nature. So the relationship between the community and its natural environment gets under severe stress. And the community starts breaking down, disintegrating into its loose bunch of individuals. And these individuals, having lost access to their collective intelligence, to that knowledge, have no option but to depend on money and markets to fulfill even the most basic of their needs. When the presence of money becomes so unquestionably essential and important, its absence can starve and kill. And that's how I think people enter the game of poverty. It's not to say that lifestyles cannot or should not change. It's just that their evolution should be in sync with what the natural constitution of a region can sustain. And it's also not that money isn't important. Money is absolutely important. It's just that money alone cannot guarantee our sense of security and happiness. We derive our security and happiness from the way we engage with our communities, from the way our communities are organized to preserve and leverage our collective intelligence. When we think of money as the only means to everything, we start getting entrapped. It's like wearing a binoculars all the time. Just as that will gradually degenerate our inherent capacity to see and comprehend, excessive dependence on money and markets also tend to degenerate our inherent ability to survive and to self-organize. A wise man I know often tells me that the true purpose of martial arts is to create a world in which we don't need to defend ourselves. On similar lines, I was and I continue to be inspired to contribute to the creation of a world in which we don't have to fight or eradicate poverty. A world in which poverty just cannot exist. I believe that the defining characteristic of such a world would be resilience. Clearly, resilience has very little to do with material riches. It owes a lot of itself to the way communities organize themselves. And to my mind, a resilient community has 3 simple building blocks. Number 1, a very deep respect for soil, air, and water, and all of the life that these 3 elements carry. And number 2, interdependence. It's only when the individual inhabitants establish and practice traditions of interdependence that the collective or the whole community has any chance of being independent. And number 3 is self-reliance with respect to 9 basic needs: food and water, shelter, clothing, healthcare, energy, connectivity, trade, education, and disaster management. So in short, resilience is a state in which a community employs ecologically sustainable means to fulfill the 9 basic needs of all the inhabitants. I found the idea of creating resilience far more inspiring, empowering, and liberating as compared to the idea of eradicating poverty, a term I couldn't even come to define properly. It's a little shift in terms of thinking. It's like wanting to build immunity with a vision of good health versus eating a lot of junk and paying our doctors to cure us of the symptoms while the sickness perpetuates. So the real challenge is not how to make people rich. The real challenge is to get them to organize themselves into such communities. But it's not exactly comforting to know that India has 6.5 lakh villages. And when the scale is so mind-numbing, I agree, we often don't know where to start and how. I find my inspiration against such odds in a little story from a different world. And just for a perspective, let me share that story from the world of bacteria in a composting pile. That might just indicate that the odds aren't as hope-crushing as they may seem. So the primary function of bacteria in a composting pile is to decompose organic stuff. 15% of those bacteria, they decompose stuff in a way that doesn't cause any stench. So let's call them the good bacteria. There's another 15% that decompose stuff in ways that cause terrible, terrible stench. Let's call them the bad bacteria for a good reason. That leaves us with 70%. These guys who are actually capable of tilting the balance, they have no clue. They have no idea what the hell to do. They're simply waiting to take that side that starts seeming to win. So our job as good composters is to not concern ourselves with the whole 100%. It's to focus on the 15% and create an environment in which that 15% can thrive, knowing that that's what it takes to tilt the balance. I don't know if the story of bacteria is true. And I don't even know of any empirical study that says it could be true of humans. But I intuitively feel that this story holds up for a human population as well. And the nods and smiles that I see in front of me actually reinforce that feeling into a belief. So I believe that the reason why communities disintegrate is because the role models that reinforce disintegration through consumption-driven growth overwhelmingly outnumber the role models that reinforce resilience. So the solution is to build a whole lot of good role model communities across the country, at least one per every district. So where do we start? I thought we should start with a prototype of such a community. So right after my journey, I spent 3 years apprenticing with one of the poorest families in a remote village in the second driest district in India called Anantapur in the state of Andhra Pradesh. The goal was simple. I wanted to learn the ways of life in a village. I wanted to learn how to hold a spade like a farmer and how to use it like one. And I wanted to basically blend in with the locals. The experience taught me one important lesson, that any attempts to tinker with the existing systems and paradigms would require methods like confrontation, negotiation, activism, etc. These methods dissipate enormous amounts of energy. It's not funny. It's not sustainable. So we chose to demonstrate the new possibility and to trust the collective intelligence to take it forward. So in other words, we chose to be the change that we wish to see. So in 2014, we bought about 12.5 acres of absolutely dry and barren land in the same panchayat, the same cluster of villages, with the intent of setting up the prototype of a resilient rural community to be built by the villagers for the villagers. The community would derive its designs by blending the inputs of the elders in the region with contemporary appropriate technology. When we shared this intention with the villagers, 12 families moved into the land as co-owners, with absolutely nothing but a shared dream and a commitment to a resilient life. We bonded like one family, and we stuck together through the periods of self-doubt. And in the last 2 years, in the 2 years since then, we managed to harvest close to 2 crore liters of rainwater. We brought back life into the soil. We built wind, solar, and biogas systems for our energy needs. We got connected to the world of information. In fact, we are Wi-Fi enabled, and we are beaming internet wirelessly to all the neighboring remote villages. And we built eco-friendly shelters, gaining expertise as we built them. Some of the youth who are trained in these methods of construction, they're actually building a management learning center for a major corporation in Hyderabad. We are a couple of months away from becoming completely food and energy secure. And in January of 2017, we'll be launching an entrepreneurial model for all the villagers in the region to adopt the 3 principles of resilience. We hope to complete the prototype in the later part of next year with a model of education that's being designed to sustain the change we hope to cause. Later next year, we'll also be launching a fellowship program for teams from across the country to collaboratively set up role model communities in their respective regions. Kind of scale it out. While scale up implies one drop wanting to become the ocean, scale out implies a lot of like-minded drops coming together to form the ocean. All this cannot be limited to and by the vision of a small team. This could be and should be an amazing exercise of co-creation that sees us all coming together, leveraging our collective intelligence and consciousness. India has 650 plus districts, each waiting for its own role model community. Let's join hands, let's demystify development, and let's make rural India resilient.